In the middle of the 20th century, computer graphics were not an instrument of play, but a necessity of progress. Engineering and science demanded a way to visualize the invisible, to turn raw numbers into shapes that the human eye could understand. Early computers were monolithic giants, speaking only in the language of punched cards and printed lines. The transition from data to vision required a fundamental shift in how we perceive the relationship between man and machine. In the year 1950, the DAC-One project emerged from a collaboration between IBM and General Motors. This was a monumental leap, allowing engineers to move beyond the drafting table and draw directly onto a screen. It was the first time a human could interact with a computer in a spatial, visual way, proving that the digital void could be shaped by human intent. This moment laid the groundwork for everything we know about computer-aided design today. 13 years later, in the year 1963, a young researcher named Evan Sutherland took this concept to its logical extreme. He created Sketchpad, the world's first truly interactive graphics program, using a light pen to manipulate objects on a display. Sutherland did more than just write code. He invented the very vocabulary of modern computer interaction. Sketchpad proved that computers could be more than calculators. They could be canvases for human creativity. As we moved into the late 1970s, the seeds of a revolution were planted in the homes of everyday people. Personal computers like the Apple II began to offer basic graphics modes, turning the flickering television set into a portal for simple shapes and colors. While these early displays were primitive by today's standards, they sparked an obsession with visual feedback. For the first time, the power of graphics was not locked away in a laboratory. It was sitting on a mahogany desk in a suburban living room. Meanwhile, at a research center called Xerox PARC, a group of rebels was building the future of the office. The Xerox Alto pioneered the graphical user interface, or GUI, replacing lines of code with icons, windows, and folders. This was the spark that inspired Steve Jobs to commercialize the Macintosh, bringing high-resolution typography and layout to the masses. However, this beauty came at a heavy price, as the burden of rendering these images fell entirely on the central processing unit. The CPU, designed to be a master of logic and general tasks, was never meant to be a painter. Every pixel moved, every window dragged, and every line drawn required a massive amount of repetitive calculation. As software like AutoCAD and the early versions of Windows became more complex, the CPU began to buckle under the weight of the pixels. It was a bottleneck that threatened to stall the progress of the entire computing industry. The solution arrived in the year 1981, when MEC introduced the UPD7220. This chip is widely recognized as the first true two-dimensional graphics controller, a specialized piece of hardware designed to offload the burden of drawing from the CPU. It was a specialist in a world of generalists, marking the official birth of dedicated graphics hardware. This separation of duties allowed computers to become faster, smoother, and more visually capable than ever before. The expansion of IBM's open architecture led to a golden era of interchangeable graphics cards. We saw the rise of standards like CGA, EGA, and the legendary VGA, each pushing the boundaries of color and resolution. These cards were the bridge between the silent era of computing and the vibrant world of the future. The introduction of the 8514 graphics adapter showed that integrated chips could handle high-resolution tasks that were once thought impossible for a consumer machine. By the early 1990s, the demand for fast two-dimensional acceleration had reached a fever pitch. Office software and design tools were no longer luxuries. They were the backbone of the modern economy. This created a massive market for specialized hardware, leading to the rise of companies like S3, AT, and Matrix. These firms competed in a cutthroat environment where every extra bit of speed could mean the difference between dominance and bankruptcy. S3's 86C911 chip became the gold standard for this era, setting a benchmark that many others tried to emulate. It was a time of rapid iteration and fierce competition, where the goal was to make the desktop experience as fluid as possible. But even as two-dimensional graphics reached maturity, a much larger challenge was looming on the horizon. In the hidden corners of research labs, a few visionaries were trying to add a third dimension to the digital world. The dream of three-dimensional graphics was born from a desire to simulate reality itself. In the 1970s, Researchers like Ed Catmull were already demonstrating that computers could create realistic animation. They developed the concepts of texture mapping and Z-buffering, which allowed digital objects to have skin and depth. These were the building blocks of a new reality, one that would eventually move from the lab to the cinema and the home. The founding of SIGGRAPH and the creation of iconic models like the Utah Teapot gave the research community a common language. These models were not just digital toys, they were stress tests for the mathematical foundations of light and shadow. Universities began building custom hardware to render these complex scenes, while a company called Silicon Graphics started to dominate the professional market. SGI workstations were the Ferraris of the computing world, powerful, expensive, and reserved for the elite. These professional systems were capable of breathtaking feats, powering the special effects in Hollywood blockbusters and the simulations used by aerospace engineers. However, they were completely disconnected from the average person's computer. The technology required to render a three-dimensional world was simply too expensive and too complex for a standard PC. It seemed as though the third dimension would remain a playground for the wealthy and the academic. Everything changed in the mid-1990s when the PC gaming market began to explode. Gamers were no longer satisfied with flat sprites and two-dimensional side-scrollers. They wanted to step inside the game. This surged demand for affordable three-dimensional acceleration, leading to a period of absolute chaos in the hardware industry. Over 70 companies suddenly claimed to be building the next great graphics chip, creating a crowded and confusing landscape. Traditional two-dimensional vendors found themselves in a difficult position. Their hybrid designs were jacks of all trades but masters of none, and they struggled to keep up with the intense demands of real-time three-dimensional rendering. Into this vacuum stepped a disruptor named 3DFX. Their Voodoo card was a revelation, providing a level of performance that was previously unthinkable on a home computer. It turned pixelated messes into smooth, cinematic experiences. Despite its success, the Voodoo card was an architectural dead end. It was a secondary card that required a separate two-dimensional controller to even function, and it relied on a proprietary programming language called Glide. This meant that while it was the fastest on the block, it was also a closed system that was difficult to sustain. The industry needed a more integrated approach, and a small company founded by Jensen and Huang was about to provide it. Nvidia was founded on the belief that the future of graphics belonged to open standards and integrated solutions. Instead of forcing developers to use a proprietary language, Nvidia embraced Microsoft's DirectX and the industry standard OpenGL. This made it much easier for software creators to support their hardware, ensuring a steady stream of content. With the release of the Riva 128 and the TNT series, Nvidia proved they could compete with the giants of the era. The turning point came in the year 1999, with the release of the GeForce 256. This was the moment Nvidia coined the term Graphics Processing Unit, or GPU. It wasn't just a marketing gimmick, it was a fundamental shift in architecture. By integrating the transform and lighting stages directly into the hardware, Nvidia freed the CPU from the most taxing parts of the graphics pipeline. The GPU was no longer just a display controller. It was a programmable processor in its own right. This redefined the relationship between the components of a computer. The GPU had its own memory, its own logic, and its own vision for how a digital world should be constructed. From this moment on, the evolution of graphics hardware would be tied to the release of new programming interfaces. Every new version of DirectX became a survival test for hardware manufacturers. If your chip couldn't support the latest features, it was destined for the scrap heap of history. The early 2000s were defined by a titanic struggle between Nvidia and AT. This was the era of the DirectX wars, where each company would leapfrog the other in a desperate bid for performance leadership. ATI struck a massive blow with the Radeon 9700 Pro, a card so advanced it made Nvidia's offerings look ancient. It was a wake-up call for the team in green, leading to one of the most intense periods of innovation the industry has ever seen. Nvidia's response, the GeForce FX, was a rare stumble plagued by heat and noise issues. But they learned from their mistakes with remarkable speed, recovering their dominance with the GeForce 7 and 8 series. The transition to DirectX 10 was a watershed moment, introducing the concept of unified shaders. No longer were there separate parts of the chip for different tasks instead. The entire processor became a flexible pool of resources that could handle any workload. In the year 2006, the industry was reshaped yet again when AMD acquired AT. This transformed the graphics market into a two-player battlefield. A high-stakes duel between Nvidia and the newly combined AMD. While AMD focused on integration and value, Nvidia doubled down on raw performance and software ecosystems. This period of intense competition pushed the boundaries of what was possible, leading to the hyper-realistic graphics we see today. The shift to programmable shaders was more than just a graphical upgrade. It was a transformation of the GPU's soul. These chips were becoming incredibly efficient at performing many small calculations simultaneously. This parallel architecture was perfect for drawing pixels, but it also had a hidden potential for other types of work. As the GPU became more flexible, people began to wonder if it could be used for more than just games and design. While the desktop war raged on, a quieter revolution was taking place in our pockets. Mobile graphics were following a different path, one defined by the harsh constraints of battery life and heat. Companies like ARM and Qualcomm began developing their own GPU designs, focusing on efficiency over raw power. Apple eventually joined the fray, designing its own silicon to ensure that the iPhone would always have the smoothest interface and the best mobile games. Mobile GPUs utilized a technique called tile-based rendering, which allowed them to process images in small chunks to save power. It was a brilliant solution to a difficult problem, and it allowed mobile devices to eventually catch up to the visual quality of older consoles. By the year 2020, these tiny chips were even starting to support hardware-accelerated ray tracing. It was a testament to how far the technology had come, proving that great things truly do come in small packages. However, the most significant shift in the GPU's history didn't happen on a screen. It happened in the world of high-performance computing. Parallel computing had existed for decades, but it was always the domain of supercomputers and specialized labs. In the year 2007, Nvidia launched CUDA, a platform that allowed anyone to write code for the GPU using standard programming languages. At the time, it was a massive gamble that many investors didn't understand. CUDA was unprofitable for years, a specialized tool for a tiny niche of scientists and researchers. But Nvidia stayed the course, believing that the future of computing was parallel. They built a massive software ecosystem, ensuring that when the world finally needed massive computing power, Nvidia would be the only one ready to provide it. That moment arrived in the year 2012 with a breakthrough in artificial intelligence called AlexNet. Deep learning, the technology behind modern AI, requires a staggering amount of simple mathematical calculations. It turns out that a chip designed to calculate the lighting on 1,000,000 pixels is also perfect for training a neural network. AlexNet proved that using GPUs could cut the time required to train an AI from months to days. This realization sent shockwaves through the tech world, and suddenly, the GPU was the most sought-after piece of hardware on the planet. Nvidia didn't just sit back and watch, they doubled down on this new market with a ferocity that left their competitors reeling. They created CUDA, a library of tools that made it even easier for AI researchers to use their chips. They added specialized hardware called tensor cores, designed specifically to accelerate the math used in deep learning. By the time companies like AMD and Intel realized what was happening, Nvidia had already built an unassailable moat of software and hardware. With the rise of large language models and the explosion of products like ChatGPT, the demand for GPUs has reached a level of intensity that is hard to fathom. These chips are no longer just components in a PC, they are the foundation of a new industrial revolution. They are the engines of intelligence, powering the data centers that are reshaping our world. What began as a way to draw lines on a screen has become the most critical infrastructure of the 21st century. This journey from the DAC-One to the H100 is a testament to the power of a single idea, that the way we interact with information is just as important as the information itself. The GPU was born from a desire for beauty and immersion, but it found its true purpose in solving the most complex problems of our time. It is a reminder that in the world of technology, the most successful innovations are often the ones that bridge the gap between human intuition and machine logic. Looking back, we can see a clear pattern in the evolution of the GPU. It moved from a simple tool for visualization to a medium for entertainment, then to a general-purpose processor, and finally to the engine of artificial intelligence. At every step, the winners were not just the ones with the fastest hardware, but the ones who built the best ecosystems for software. It is a lesson that applies far beyond the world of silicon and copper. The story of the GPU teaches us that the greatest breakthroughs often come from places we least expect. Who could have guessed that a chip designed for teenagers to play video games would eventually be used to cure diseases and create autonomous vehicles? It is a reminder to always stay curious and to never underestimate the potential of a specialized tool. In our own lives, we should look for the GPUs, the skills or tools that might seem niche now but have the potential to change our entire world tomorrow. As we conclude this journey, I want to ask you a question. If the GPU has already transformed how we see and how we think, what do you believe is the next frontier for human-machine collaboration? Are we moving toward a world where the line between our minds and our machines disappears entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below, as I always enjoy hearing your perspectives on these deep transformations. I hope this deep dive into the history of the GPU has given you a new appreciation for the technology that powers your world. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and for being part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories from the frontier of human history and technology.